What the hell happened to Nate Diaz's physique? Jake Paul and Nate Diaz just happened, and I'm seeing a bunch of people talking about how out of shape Diaz was and how strong Jake looked. Some people have even said that they expected Nate Diaz to lose and they picked against him based on how he looked at the weigh-ins, and he looked really out of shape. So let's talk about it. Before we do, quick comments on the fight itself. Caveat, this is not an MMA channel. It's fundamentally a fitness, self-development and calling out BS channel. But I'm also a lifetime martial artist, so we also cover a lot of fighting stuff in relation to fitness too. Well, the fight, it kind of went how I expected, to be honest. I was rooting for Diaz, of course, but as a mixed martial artist myself, I don't want to accept that Jake will probably win. But we all knew deep down how it was going to go. Diaz is 39 years old, a retired MMA fighter. He doesn't actually have that great boxing. He never really has. It's just the grit and endurance that overwhelms his opponents. Diaz has said it himself. His game plan is usually to overwhelm you with volume to make you shoot for the takedown so he can wrap you up in a guillotine or a submission because he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's also only fought 3 times since November 2019. Jorge Masvidal, Tony Ferguson and Leon Edwards, and now Jake Paul, whereas Jake has had 8 fights since 2021, and I know the quality of opponents is different, but Jake has had 8 fights within the boxing discipline. Nate's had 3 fights within MMA. Jake's also training every day like a madman, got lots of money to put into it, and he's also got youth and power on his side. Nate Diaz isn't a power puncher, never mind competing at 185, that's not his natural weight division. A lot of people are saying that Jake was embarrassing not being able to knock out almost 40-year-old Nate Diaz, but the Diaz brothers don't get knocked out, kind of like us Scousers, isn't that right, Paddy?
I'm a Scouser. We don't get knocked out.
So expecting Jake to knock out Nate Diaz is a little bit unrealistic. These MMA commentary YouTubers are just exuding pure cope that Jake won. They don't like it, and it's almost a way to discredit Jake's win. And listen, I'm not even a big Jake fan. I'm just trying to look at it logically here and not pick sides. At the end of the day, he knocked Diaz down in round 5 and probably contributed more to that CTE. So Jake done well, but once again, it was against a retired 40-year-old MMA fighter. Now, people are saying that Diaz was out of shape and looked terrible. People are going viral on TikTok, making videos saying that Diaz has got the worst physique genetics. Let's take a look at Diaz's physicality over the years and see out of shape he's really gotten. Let's get into it. Diaz began his pro career in 2004 fighting in the WEC against Alejandro Garcia. He was only 19 years old, and you can see here he's quite lean, not that much muscle on his frame. He's around 10% body fat, so not shredded, but in decent shape for a fighter. And we know that muscles don't win fights, although Bradley Martin, I know you're going to be in the comments, you're going to have something to say. Of course muscles win fights. We can tell here that he's got a young lad's physique. It takes a while to fill out naturally from having a teenager's body. Even in your 20s, it takes a good few years to no longer look like a teenager. You don't start filling out properly until your mid-20s, 25 to 28 usually. Anyway, fast forward a few years to Nate's first UFC fight in 2007 versus Junior Asuncao. We can see Diaz's build hasn't changed much. If anything, he could be slightly leaner, but for the most part, he looks the same. Diaz has still got another couple of years to start filling out more. He fought the early part of his career in the lightweight division, 155 pounds. So in these fights, he's going to have a leaner look than in his more recent fights. You can see he goes through the late 2000s, not making much of a change physique-wise. But then Nate Diaz made his first welterweight appearance, which is 170 pounds, so 15 pounds more than what he's used to fighting at. And this was in 2010 against Rory Markham. And this is how he looked. Clearly, he's a lot more filled out due to not needing to cut weight and also being a little bit older. Now, you can see he's not shredded, but he's certainly a lot leaner than his more recent fights at 170. In these fights at 170, he doesn't look too bad. This is where he's coming into his physical prime. His body is still growing and building muscle from the strength and conditioning work he's doing. He doesn't look flabby at all. He's still got a bit of a six-pack. But now it seems like when he fought Dos Anjos in 2014, his physique regressed a little bit, but it was meant to be back at lightweight, 155 pounds, and he actually missed weight for this fight, which means he either had a bad camp and didn't get the fat weight off in time, or he cut too much water weight and looks depleted and flat. When you're trying to cut weight for the fight, a lot of the time they don't lose the fat weight and they just try and get all of the weight off in the form of water, and some of this water is the glycogen stored within our muscles. And when you get rid of this from doing a low-carb diet and then all the subcutaneous water from doing the Epsom salt baths, your muscles, like a wet flannel, literally get drained of all the water and look flatter. That's probably why he didn't look in good shape against Dos Anjos. But let's move forward to the first Conor fight in 2016 at 170 pounds. He actually looks a lot leaner here at 170 pounds than he did at 155 pounds in 2014 against Dos Anjos. Well, 160 pounds because he missed weight. And I actually think his best shape was the McGregor rematch. His chest was more filled out, his abs were popping at 170 pounds, delts were popping more, and I think this is Diaz's peak physique, most likely because he was training his hardest around the McGregor era with knowing the gravity and pressure of the situation. He knew it was the most eyes and the most attention he's ever had on him. Therefore, the stakes were a lot higher and he probably trained harder because of this. Now, he somewhat maintained this physique in the Masvidal fight, although I think he did lose a little bit of size. This could be because there was a 3-year gap in him fighting from 2016 against McGregor to 2019 against Masvidal. Then the Tony Ferguson fight in 2022, we can see he's starting to look a lot softer. He's lost a lot of his muscle definition and no longer has abs. This fight was also at 170 pounds. This could be because it was his last fight on his contract and he was already weighing up his options outside the UFC. He wasn't ever going to re-sign with the UFC. He said his plan was to go and fight Jake Paul, so maybe he didn't train as hard for the Tony Ferguson fight as he did for the McGregor and Masvidal fight, which reflects in his physique. Now, I do say all this, but we are talking about minor changes here. Diaz, if you're watching this, I don't care. Who cares if you've lost a bit of muscle or gained a little bit of fat? This is me being hyper-analytical about the smallest changes, mainly in response to what everyone is saying about Diaz being out of shape. Now, when we look at the Jake fight, was he actually out of shape in comparison to what he's usually like? I wouldn't say drastically. At most, you could say he's had a little bit of muscle atrophy, so that's muscle loss, and he doesn't look as lean as he usually looks, but there's a reason for that. So with this Jake Paul fight, everyone's commenting on Diaz's physique, saying he looked terrible, he was out of shape, but what you have to remember, they were fighting at 185 pounds. This isn't Diaz's natural weight class. Diaz, if anything, is more of a 160 pounder. 155 is probably a little bit hard for him to get down to now. I'd say 170 pounds is probably just a little bit too much. He's definitely a 160 pounder. He was never going to look ripped and in shape at 185 pounds. So people who were saying he was out of shape don't really know what they're talking about. He agreed to fight at a higher weight class, which means he's not going to look in shape. But in fighting, being in shape isn't just defined by your physique. It also means being in shape fitness-wise to go the distance. And come fight night, we seen Diaz was in great shape. He had cardio for days. There's a common Diaz joke that Nate Diaz doesn't lose fights, he just runs out of time. It's very easy to say Diaz is out of shape, but relative to who? When you contrast Diaz against Jake Paul, who is more of a natural 185er. Jake Paul's also 10 years younger and has got a lot more muscle on his frame and a completely different build than Diaz. Of course, it seems like Diaz is out of shape, but if Diaz cut back down to 170 or 155 pounds, he'd be ripped again. Now, if he did drop back down in weight class, would he have less muscle? Yeah, maybe, because I'm not too sure, but I don't think Nate Diaz does much weight training or strength and conditioning outside of fight camps. He could do, but the Diaz brothers are mostly known for their endurance and triathlon training, and a triathlon combines swimming, cycling and running in one event. So needless to say, expecting Nate Diaz to maintain his physique in his late 30s is a little bit unrealistic. People just love to have an opinion. And one final point on this matter, Nate has been a vegan since he was 18 years old. Vegans have a much harder time to build muscle due to the nature of the diet. The majority of a vegan or even vegetarian's food intake will be carbohydrates and fats over protein. Therefore, it's harder to get in all 20 amino acids due to the amino acids of typical vegan food being incomplete. So you're getting less protein in and you're missing out on some amino acids unless you're really meticulous with your food selection. So to summarize, expecting an almost 40-year-old vegan endurance-based fighter competing almost 2 divisions above his natural weight class to be shredded and in great shape is an uneducated opinion. Considering all this, Nate Diaz looked fine. And if you currently feel like you're building muscle like a 40-year-old vegan, then check out my Natural Physique Academy. I'm a lifetime martial artist and 12-year personal trainer, and I've put together an 8-week course giving you all of the resources you'll ever need to learn how to build an athletic-looking and athletic-performing physique. It's currently a big sale on the program before they increase the price. I hope to see you inside. Make sure you subscribe for a cool variety of man content. Like the video and tune in for daily uploads. See you tomorrow.